Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to continue with my series on camera basics. My last one, where we talked about aperture and focal length, went down fairly well. If you haven't seen it, I'll leave a link to it in the top right. But today we're going to talk about shutter speed and ISO. To be honest, in landscape photography, shutter speed normally doesn't matter too much, but today I've come to the beach and I'll show you a few situations where it is good to change your shutter speed and you can get dramatically different shots. So if you've just got yourself a camera or you're just getting into photography, this is the video for you. Stay tuned and hopefully you'll learn something and improve your shots at the end of it. So as I say, shutter speed doesn't normally matter too much in landscape photography because the thing you're photographing isn't moving, it's a landscape, it's not going anywhere, and you're normally on a tripod, so your camera's nice and still, also not moving. So I normally just set the aperture to what it needs to be, and then I adjust the shutter speed to what I need to make the shot expose correctly. When you're around water, however, that all changes because you can get very different shots with different shutter speeds. There's also a few other times, which I'll go into in a minute, on where the shutter speed can really affect your photo. Let's start with the water. Today it's very windy, the sea has got huge waves in it, and if you really want to capture the movement in those waves, then you want a nice quick shutter speed. That'll really show you the sort of detail in the waves and convey the fact that it is a windy day and the waves are huge, and that might be what you want from your photo. Let's take one on something like 500th of a second and show you what it looks like. So as you can see from that shot, we've really captured all the movement in the water. We've shown the power of the waves, it's come out brilliantly. But let's say you wanted to smooth out that water, give it more of an ethereal look. That's where you need to open up your shutter for a longer period of time, let more light in, and what that'll essentially do is average the light coming into the camera over that length of the shutter you've left open. So if you've got a 25-second shutter, the average of the water will basically be in your photo. Now, to do this on a sunny day, you might need to get yourself some ND filters, and if you don't know about those, I'll do a video next, so make sure you subscribe to see that. But when you put your filter on, you'll get a bit longer shutter speed from maybe sort of a second or less than that even, the 500th of a second we had a minute ago, up to something like 25 seconds, which is what we've got now, and now really smooth out that water, give it an ethereal look. Let me take that shot now and show you how it looks. I won't make you sit through all 25 seconds of it. You can hopefully see from that one, it is a completely different shot. Completely different vibe, completely different atmosphere, makes the scene seem very calm, complete contrast to the first shot we took. And that's just changing the shutter speed. I've left the aperture, I've left the focal length, everything else the same. All we've done is change the shutter speed. I've just come a bit further out the beach to get out of the winds. Hopefully you can hear what I'm saying a little bit better. But essentially, that's all there is for shutter speeds. The only other time it makes a big difference is if you've got a subject that's moving. For example, if you're trying to take a photo of trees that are blowing in the wind, then you'll need to increase your shutter speed just so that they're sharp and they're not all blurry. Otherwise, that's all there is for landscape photography. If you're photographing animals or wildlife, obviously that's a completely different situation, and go and watch someone else's video. But for landscapes, that's all you really need. The only other time that it's quite cool to increase shutter speed is if you've got a few people moving around inside your shot. It only works if there's a few people and they're moving, but because the camera will average out the light for each point in the photograph, if you increase your shutter speed to 30 seconds or a minute, then essentially it'll average them out so they're not there. So you can essentially get rid of a few people in your photograph. It doesn't work if you've got hundreds of people moving around, or if people are stood still, it won't help you there. But if you've just got a few people wandering around, then you might find that helps. But let's move on to ISO, and as the sun starts to set, I'll show you a few examples of when you not need to increase your ISO. Alright, so unfortunately, after I said that, it started absolutely chucking it down, which isn't very good for my film camera. So it's now a new day and a new location. But let's talk about ISO. ISO is basically your camera's sensitivity to light. You can think of it in some ways as an audio amplifier. You can turn the volume up on the amplifier, it makes it sound louder, the quality not quite as good. Essentially your camera's doing the same thing. You're basically telling it you haven't got enough light for the photo you want to take, you're not letting enough light hit that sensor, and you're telling it to do the best it can and make the best image it can out of imperfect conditions. Most of the time in landscape photography, you're photographing on the base ISO of your camera. Most of them do ISO 100, a few of the higher end Nikons go down to ISO 64, and I think a few of the Sonys maybe go down to ISO 50. And that's fine because you can increase the light hitting the sensor through other means. You can have a longer shutter speed, or maybe you can change the aperture, and a different way of getting more light into your sensor. However, this isn't always the case. At the moment we're at the sea, and this is a perfect example. What I want to try to do is get these waves here hitting this sort of pier that we've got going out, and I want to capture the waves. I want them to be sharp in detail with this nice orange sky in the background. And I can't do that at ISO 100. There's just not enough shutter speed. I need a shutter speed of about 1/200 to get those waves sharp. and I just can't do that on ISO 100. So what I've had to do is bump it all the way up to ISO 4000, which is getting me the shot that I want. Now I think ISO is one of the few things that's quite regularly misunderstood, especially with beginner photographers. Because whenever you read on forums or things, they'll always tell you should only shoot at ISO 100, or only shoot at low OSIs, don't go higher than ISO 320 or 400 or something like that. And to be honest, with modern cameras, it's absolute rubbish. If you get to a location and you haven't got enough light to make the shot you want to work, and you can't solve that by either adding more light or increasing the shutter speed, or changing the aperture to get more light onto your sensor, then well, you either go home without a photo or you increase your ISO and make the best of it. It will vary on your camera. If you've got a camera with an APS-C size sensor or a smaller sensor, then it's not going to do as well. And the same with older cameras, they won't process the image as well as a modern one, but you'll still be able to get somewhere much higher than ISO 100 without seeing the quality drop off. Okay, so let's jump into a few example shots. Like I say, for these shots here, I've had to go all the way up to ISO 4000 to get the shot that I want, which is a 1/200th of a second shutter, to really get the water in motion and make it so it's not a blur, basically. So let's compare some of the earlier shots I did, which were at ISO 100, and they were about 1/6 of a second. Some of the later ones at ISO 4000, which are at 1/200th of a second. So this first image is the cleanest, highest quality image, but those waves hitting the pier are so blurry that for me at least, it loses some of that energy and ends up being a worse shot than the other two. This second image I actually quite like. It's probably the one that I'd choose out of the three. The water still has some detail, but it still conveys the movement. You've got a little bit of blur, but you can just see the movement happening in the shot. You can see that there is some noise in the image, especially in the sky, but it's nothing too much that I'd worry about. In this third image, the water is really sharp and you can see all the detail, but there is quite a lot of noise visible, especially in the sky. Don't worry too much about this, I'll show you how to fix it in just a minute. And to be honest, even if you do get home and find you've taken an image that's got a lot of noise in it, where you've gone to a higher ISO, these days it's much less of a problem than it used to be. Things like AID noise in Adobe Lightroom will get rid of quite a lot of that noise, bring your image back to a point that is perfectly acceptable, even for larger prints or more professional work. And certainly if you're on social media, no one's ever going to notice. The bigger problem really with increasing your ISO is you lose dynamic range, which is the difference in the darkest areas of your scene to the lightest areas. And that really is a problem because you can't really recover that, short of doing multiple exposures, which if you're taking a fast shot might not be working for you anyway. One of the other misconceptions about ISO I find is that if you're shooting in RAW, people seem to think that you can underexpose your image, still shoot at ISO 100, and then raise those shadows up in something like Lightroom. And yes, that does work, you'll recover the detail, but Lightroom in general will do a worse job at keeping the detail and reducing the noise than your camera will. So if you're doing that deliberately and it's not just a mistake and you haven't just got home and realised your image is too dark, then I would, if you're still on location, increase your ISO, properly expose the image, and then you don't have to worry so much about increasing those levels later on. And you'll find overall that'll give you a much better quality image. So don't underexpose to try and get the ISO 100 and then increase them later. The other thing that people will quite often say is that you should come back when you've got better conditions, either more light or when you've got a different, you can have more light yourself, maybe with a torch. But that's not always possible. Tonight, for example, I wanted this fantastic orange sky and we needed the windy weather to capture the waves in motion. So this was the time I had to come out. And you can't add more light, not really. A torch is not going to make any difference there. Of course, this video is also aimed at beginners, and if you're taking this as a hobby, then you might not have the time or the money to keep going back to location time and time again, just waiting for those perfect conditions. Or you might be on holiday, and that's the one time you've got to photograph that location. And what are you going to do? Either increase your ISO and get something that people will tell you is not technically perfect, or you go home without the photo. And where's the fun in that? So as I stand in front of this absolutely epic sky and sunset that's happening right behind me, I think that just about covers the basics of shutter speed and ISO. Like I say, in landscape photography, most of the time they don't matter too much, but there are a few exceptions, like the ones we've been through tonight, which just show you the difference they can really make and when you really need to pay attention to your ISO and your shutter speed. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you've learned something or haven't liked it, then give it a quick like. If you've got your own tips and comments, leave them down below and we can all learn together. Subscribe so you can see more. I think the next one will be on reading the histogram. Maybe I'll do one on filters as well. If you want something, let me know. And I'll hope to see you soon.